Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to help support the show by becoming a premium member, please go to dogmanencounters.com/podcast to sign up. Memberships are only $2.99 a month. By becoming a premium member, you'll be able to download episodes onto your mobile device and listen to them commercial-free wherever you go. Also, if you'd like to check out the new Dogman Encounters t-shirt store, please go to dogmanencounters.com/store and take a look around. Buying a t-shirt or sweatshirt there is another great way to help support the show. As always, thanks for listening. I want to mix things up here tonight. Instead of having another eyewitness come on and tell you about their encounter, I want to narrate a bunch of encounters for you. I've been meaning to do this for some time, and I think tonight's the right time to do that. This first encounter happened in Mississippi County, New Jersey, and reads, I was leaving church one night, so I grabbed a bike from the side of the church. After doing that, I started pedaling down a long, dark street which only had one street light. It was on a corner about a half-mile down. Now, I'm a city kind of guy. I never did like the country, but I was visiting my friend and I had a cousin who lived in the town at the time. Anyway, as I was riding, all I could think about was the fact I made the dumbest mistake leaving that church so late by myself. I was also wondering if I was ever going to make it to that lonely street light that seemed like it was miles away. So, I did whatever I could to take my mind off this dark street that was so quiet. I sung and talked to myself out loud, but I pedaled slowly because I was so scared. I was trying to make sure I could hear everything. I remember counting the poles that were every 50 feet on the side of the street. All of a sudden, I remember looking down at the bottom of one of the poles. When I did that, I saw what looked like a furry black mass. All sorts of things were going through my mind. I was about 30 feet away from it. I was saying to myself, maybe it's a little black bear, I hope. I was so scared because that streetlight was still so far off. When I was about 8 to 10 feet away from it, I noticed it wasn't a bear. Whatever it was crouching down, maybe even resting. All of a sudden, it started standing up. I can't even begin to put into words the fear that went through my body. Now, I'm about 6'4", so standing up on a pedal bike, I'd say I'm maybe 6'10". Well, this thing had to be more like 8 to 9 feet tall because I was still looking up at it. All I could do was look at it from the corner of my eye because I was so scared and didn't want to stare directly at it. It seemed like time slowed down. I was stuck. I wasn't even pedaling anymore because I thought if I did, it would start to chase me. It was so dark out, but this thing was darker than night. I could barely make it out, but from the little bit I could see of it, this thing was massive. Like Game of Thrones, the mountain massive. It was so muscular it looked like a bodybuilder on steroids. And just when I thought I couldn't become any more afraid, I was about parallel with it when its eyes opened. I've never seen anything like those eyes. They were like something out of a horror movie. Not real. They were glowing a fluorescent yellow like in the movie Predator from the 80s. As I was passing it, I just kept waiting to be snatched off the bike, never to be seen again. This thing looked like it could do that with no problem. Anyway, that didn't happen because I'm telling you most of this story now. Time, 10 p.m. Date, 1995. This next encounter took place in Pickaway County, Ohio, and reads, I've listened to your show and feel like I can tell you what happened to me one evening while hunting coyotes on my father-in-law's land. It was about 6 or 7 p.m. and right at dusk. I was in a hunting blind on the edge of a ravine overlooking a creek about 30 feet down. Just beyond that was a cornfield. I was trying to call a few in because not a week before one of the neighbor's cows had been mutilated and we all assumed it had been a coyote that had done that. Well, it was getting very dark and I was about to leave when I heard footsteps walking up behind me. I called out in a low voice to my father-in-law, thinking it was him, letting him know I acknowledged his presence and lowered my crossbow. When I looked out the mesh window, I didn't see him and was perplexed that he hadn't called back. That's when I heard sniffing right behind the blind, not 3 feet away. I was taken aback and excited, thinking this must have been a coyote that had come in to see what was in distress. I turned slowly in my chair, raising my crossbow, and that's when I heard a growl. It was very deep and guttural, and I felt a deep dread fall over me. I knew that whatever growled that deep was much larger than a coyote. I laid my crossbow down and grabbed the .45 ACP sidearm I always carried while hunting and started to pray. I felt like I was in serious danger and that I might have a fight on my hands. I've been attacked by a wild dog before and still have the scars from that to this day. What I then saw walking away from the tent changed the course of my life and popped a safety bubble I didn't even realize I'd been living in my whole life while out hunting or spending time in the woods. I watched a wolf on its hind legs walk away from my blind along the edge of the ravine. It then jumped down and disappeared out of my sight. I exhaled and realized I was holding my breath and was shaking. I held my .45 up at the ready. This creature was at least as tall as me, and I'm 5'10". He was hunched down while walking away, so he had to be at least 7 feet tall standing upright. His fur was dark gray and his back was heavily muscled and very defined. His arms were long and looked like he had hands. I could see the tops of his ears over his hunched back. I never did see his face, but he had legs like a canine. I felt frozen and was in disbelief. I wanted to both run as fast as I could out of there and also be still and ready in case this thing came back. After about a minute of deep breathing, I readied my things and slowly eased out of the blind, keeping my firearm up and sweeping the area as I moved toward my truck about 300 yards away. It was the hardest thing not to run at a full sprint, but darkness was coming on quickly and I did not want to be out there late with this thing. I made it to my truck and sped out of there as fast as I could. Since that night, I've been struggling with what I saw and went through. It's hard to talk to others about this. My family is very proper and practical and would reduce what I saw to a mere shadow. If they didn't say that, they'd claim I was making a coyote seem bigger or something like that. It's comforting to know after researching that there are others who have seen things like this too. I feel better just sharing this with you. One other thing happened that I'd like to share. I moved to an old house about 10 miles away from the land where I was hunting, and for about a week, my 2-year-old daughter would tell me about the bad wolf outside. This was about 2 years after my hunting incident, so I didn't think much of it at first. She kept on about the bad wolf outside, so I started to get concerned. I told her to come get me if she saw it again. Well, one night at about 8 p.m., she came to me saying, "Bad wolf outside." Then she led me to her room on the 2nd story and told me to look out the window. We had a floodlight out back. Back there we had a huge chicken coop. About 50 yards behind that, we had a run area, and about 10 more yards beyond that was the wood line. I scanned the yard but didn't see anything. I looked around the coop thinking it might have been my neighbor's dogs trying to get to my chickens but saw nothing. Then I looked at the wood line and saw it. Just like before, I saw a large wolf creature standing in the wood line. It was upright and staring right at us. It was standing right behind a large wooden cross I had put up just at the wood line. The cross was about 9 feet tall, and this creature was shorter, but not by much. Again, I was frozen, but this time I was angry because it was at my home. It had been watching my daughter and probably my whole family for who knows how long. I picked up my daughter and stared right back at it. It had yellowish glowing eyes from the floodlight reflection. I carried her into my room and called my son while trying to stay calm. I put them both on my bed and then went into my gun safe and grabbed my .45-70 lever-action rifle. I then headed back to that window and saw that it was gone. I didn't sleep much that night and had the kids sleep with my wife and me. I was staring outside for a long while. I haven't seen it or any others since then and pray I never will. I live near Circleville, Ohio. Like I said, it feels good sharing this with you. Thank you for taking the time if you made it this far into my story. Time, 6:45 p.m. Date, November of 2015. If you happen to live in Pickaway County, Ohio, I've got some bad news for you. Guess where this next encounter is from too, just like the previous one. This next encounter happened in Pickaway County as well, and reads, I had a house that sat way back on a lane. I raised collies there to show, sell, and also just for pets to support showing them. I was married and had a young child at the time. Our house is still there today. There was a lot of farmland around us. Our property was about 6 acres. As you came down a very long lane, our property was hidden by a natural divider of woods and a stream that bordered 2 sides of our property. We were very isolated behind those trees. We had woods in front and to our left a couple hundred acres that bordered our property. Our house was unusual because 3 sides of it sat in the ground. You could literally walk on it from the ground on 3 sides, and it was quite common to have animals run across it. Even our own dogs did that when they were loose. Anyway, to my encounter. We always heard a lot of howling near our property, and I'd heard coyotes plenty of times, as they were a real nuisance around there. I lived with a wolf pup for a while and visited wolf conservation centers, so I knew the howls were more closely related to wolves than to coyotes. One evening the dogs were acting a little strange. Their kennel building sat separately from the house and was behind the garage. It literally sat at the edge of the woods. Anyway, we had about a dozen dogs that had super large chain link pens that were about 20 by 30 feet. You basically walked through them to access gates in order to get everyone in or out. Needless to say, none of the dogs wanted to be put in their kennels at night normally, but on this particular night, all of them were standing at their gates ready to go in. That just didn't happen. Besides that, they were unusually quiet. I put everyone up, locked the kennel building for the night, and walked back to the house. It was around 9 p.m. Because the ordinances in our county, they weren't allowed to be out after dark because they'd be barking. At 11, my husband and I heard something on the roof. It wasn't running, it was just taking steps and stopping, then taking more steps. You could hear a sort of growling with the steps. You could literally follow it as it walked on the roof. About 20 minutes passed without the footsteps or growling sounds, so I told my husband that I was going to go check my dogs. So, I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. The dogs were completely silent, even with me opening the door, which normally results in pandemonium. As I walked back up towards the house, I could hear something moving behind and up to the right side of the house. There were no lights up there, so that part of our property was completely dark. As I walked up the hill that bordered that side, my steps slowed as the atmosphere radiated with some form of menace the higher I climbed. About 40 feet behind the house, I caught sight of something moving to my right, like I was being stalked quietly. My flashlight lit up this creature and we stared at each other for what felt like minutes, but probably wasn't that long. After I realized it wasn't a dog, I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when it let out the most menacing growl I've ever heard. It sent chills down my spine, and I thought my heart was going to jump out of my chest. I was so scared. I backed up a step, and it came forward as I did. I dropped the light, but I could clearly see it in the moonlight. It had golden eyes, long shaggy black hair that looked very thick, and a long muzzle. Its muzzle was filled with teeth that were definitely not a dog's, as its canine teeth looked to be 2 to 3 inches long. Its head was twice the size of a normal dog. The whole animal was the size of a large Shetland pony. It didn't stand on 2 legs, but it wasn't a dog. I started backing up to go back down the hill on the side of the house, and it moved with me, but not straight at me. It moved low to the ground and kind of zigzagged as it moved. It seemed like it was trying to figure out how to get around me to cut me off, but it couldn't due to the layout of the property. I made it back into the house and was so scared out of my mind. My husband thought I was playing a joke because I've always been a werewolf movie fanatic. This wasn't that and not a dog. It was intelligent and menacing. He could tell I was really shaken up, but when he went out, it was gone. What was really weird was, around 2 in the morning, there was a lot of loud knocking on the front door. We opened it and it was one of the township deputies. Someone had complained about our dogs barking and howling. I told him about the animal that had visited us earlier, and he could clearly see that the howling was not our dogs, as they were completely silent and the noise continued while he was there. I haven't forgotten that experience, even though it was so long ago. I still get spooked when I go out in the dark, to the point where I have a large spotlight on the back of my house that's on all night. I also close the blinds and curtains at night and make sure my doors are locked. After listening to your show, I can only surmise that this was a Dogman. It was a completely natural creature and was really quite beautiful, and had I not been so scared out of my mind, maybe I would have been able to appreciate that. Thank you for letting me tell my story. I'm sure my friends and family think I'm nuts, as they've made fun of me over the years as I've told them about this. Even though that's the case, I know what I saw, and I know it's out there. I just hope I never see it again. Time, 11:10 p.m. Date, June 28, 1995. The next encounter took place in Coryell County, Texas, and reads, "This took place on the largest military base in the United States. I would often go on walks on the installation, seeing as the entrance was only 1 mile from the town I grew up in. I had been this same route many times, but this time was different. It was close to dusk when I walked across the cattle guards and into this area. I walked about a mile and came to a stock pond I had been at many times throughout my childhood and as an adult. I'm no stranger to this area. I've been there many times. Game is abundant as well as cattle, seeing as they free-range cattle in this area. Water is scarce in these parts, so animals seem to collect around man-made stock ponds. So, I'm walking around this pond that was starting to dry up, and there at the water's edge, I see a huge canine print. It was almost as big as my hand. I have freakishly large hands and feet, but this track was so big and so full, it just didn't register automatically for some reason. I bent over and examined the track. It was deep into the ground, deeper than my footprints, and I weighed probably 245 or 250 pounds at the time. It was a clean track with no hint of a slide. I examined the print, taking note of its characteristics. I've been around large dogs my whole life, Rottweilers, Mastiffs, and so on. I also worked on a farm for a private collector who owned a full-sized African lion, a tiger, mountain lions, curricles, chimps, and numerous Bavarian Rottweilers. I cleaned their cages and am familiar with the size of their tracks. This track was different for sure. It was deep and very large. I bent over to get a closer look, and I guess everything clicked in my brain. That's when I felt fear for the first and only time in my life. I was so spooked. The wind started to pick up, and I smelled this creature. It smelled like strong urine. On the other side of this small pond, native grasses had grown about 4 feet tall, and they were dense. In that grass was a creature that looked like a wolf crouched down, I guess. I couldn't see its body, only its head, and its size took my breath away. It didn't move. I pretended not to see this creature, but it definitely saw me. Its head was triangle-shaped with huge pointy ears on top. It had a long snout like a wolf. I turned around and started to walk away calmly toward the way I came in and started running when I got about halfway home. It never came at me and I never looked back. I've never told anyone about this. I'm not crazy. I've replayed this scenario 1,000,000 times in my head. I know what I saw, and I've never been back to that place. Time, 8 p.m. Date, 2015. Before I read this next encounter, if you'd like to help support the show by getting your own Dogman Encounters t-shirt, please go to dogmanencounters.com/store. That'll take you right to the store where you can see all the different designs. Alright, let's get on to this next encounter. The next encounter took place in Crook County, Wyoming. I have about 8.5 acres here, about 10 miles east of Devil's Tower in the middle of the Black Hills, and my house sits atop a hill overlooking the forest below. There's a creek that runs past my land about 400 yards or so, and then it goes up a sharp hill. I was outside with my 2 German shepherds looking down at my fence line. Quite a ways off from me and the dogs, as we were just outside the front door, I saw something running my fence line towards the creek heading south. This is what freaks me out something fierce. It was either black or very dark gray and big, and I mean from where I was, it had to be 7 or 8 feet tall. And it didn't look like it normally ran on all fours, but it was running on all fours when I saw it. It was moving so fast, really fast. It was no bear, it was no coyote, and it couldn't have been a wolf. It looked too skinny to be any normal animal, and to me, it looked as if it normally would walk upright like we do, but it was running on all fours when I saw it, and it disappeared into the trees. I only saw it for all of a second. The more I thought about it, the more it freaked me out. It didn't look natural, and I do mean it. It wasn't like any animal I've ever seen in all of my life. And you're talking about a man who spent all of his life in big-time woods, from Alaska to Hawaii, and I've seen it all. Bears, mountain lions, wild boars in Hawaii, coyotes, buffalo, a female moose with a calf, you name it. I've probably seen it in the woods at one point or another. I even came across most of the animals I just mentioned right in front of me in my path at some point or another, and this was like nothing I have ever seen. The birds were all chirping and singing away until this thing came along. Then the forest went so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Nothing made a noise. The whole thing left me feeling like I knew I had just seen something I wish I hadn't. I sent this info to a Christian friend of mine who has had some pretty nasty encounters with creatures most people don't believe in. After a while, I got a response. She said this sounded like a Dogman to her. I'd never heard of such a thing. So, I did some looking and came across your website, and then I saw the picture of the canine-type Dogman. That is exactly what I saw. No doubt about it. I'm absolutely certain of it. I never would have believed in such a creature 48 hours ago. Now, I can't get the sight of him out of my head. I'll never forget this as long as I live. The forest was quiet all night. I went to bed early as I had had enough. It was just too much, but I'll tell you this, I slept with my .45 and Bible close by last night. Very close. Time, 2 p.m. Date, May 9th, 2018. Signed, Travis Scroggins. This next eyewitness had encounters in Red River County, Texas, and in Miller County, Arkansas. Her reports read, "My father was an avid real-life cowboy when I was growing up. He rode horses and was a very good amateur roper, which meant he roped cattle with a partner at rodeos and smaller events we called ropings. As a child, my favorite thing to do was to go and watch my daddy rope at these ropings all over the county. We were coming home from one late one night in the summer of 1991. I was 10 years old. My stepmother was driving, I was in the front seat, and my two sisters were asleep in the back. My dad was way behind us in his truck with his horse trailer in tow. We were driving down our road and were just about home. The house we lived in was at the dead end of a very long gravel road, way out in the country with just woods on one side and cow pastures on the other. We were about to turn into our driveway when on the left side of the road, behind a fence, I saw eye shine. The eyes were greenish yellow and huge. As we got closer, the headlights hit this thing and I almost peed my pants. I was staring at what I thought was a werewolf. It was standing behind a barbed wire fence on the wooded side of the road and looked like it could have just stepped right over it if it wanted to. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. It was jet black and had tall pointed ears like a German shepherd, but the face was more wolf-like than dog-like. Its arms hung down almost to where its knees were and were built like a man's arms. I didn't get a good look at its legs because it was standing behind the fence and was obscured by some brush. Its waist was tapered like a human's. It had huge, broad, bulky shoulders and its head was massive. It had its tongue out and seemed to be panting like a dog would. It was a summer night in northeast Texas, so I'm sure it was hot. All of a sudden, it looked to its left like it had heard something. Then it dropped down and disappeared into the woods. No one but me saw it. My stepmother said I was just seeing things because I was tired, and if I had seen anything, it was probably just a coyote. I grew up in the country and know what coyotes look like, and this was no coyote. The most terrifying thing was that it was only about 20 feet from our driveway. I didn't sleep a wink at all that night. Every sound I heard outside made me jump. After that, I never went into those woods again and never went outside alone at night. I also had another encounter at a house I lived in about 40 miles away. It was in a small town I lived in for a while about 2 years ago. This house was also on a very rural gravel road and was surrounded by woods. I had just had brain surgery and was recouping at home. I stepped out on the front porch one night for some fresh air after cooking a big meal. It was fall around the first part of October and the weather was really nice. I sat down on the porch swing to have a cigarette and noticed that the dogs were nowhere in sight. I thought that was odd because they would always come running when they heard the front door open. Then I also realized that everything was very quiet. No crickets, no birds, no dogs barking, nothing. It had just started to get dark, so there should have still been birds and squirrels making noises as they needed to bed down for the night, but there was no sound at all. I started to get this really eerie feeling that something was watching me. I looked towards the woods but didn't see anything. I relaxed just a little bit in my swing, and then I heard something crashing very loudly through the woods. It sounded like it was running, but not towards me. It sounded like it was coming from the side of the house and going farther into the woods. I picked up my phone and used its flashlight, and that's when I saw it. This one was reddish brown, which for some reason was a lot more frightening than the black one. It was on 2 legs and it was moving very fast away from the house, lightning fast, but I saw enough of it to know exactly what it was. It had the same huge broad shoulders, the same long arms, and the same tapered waist. This one was smaller than the one I saw when I was a kid, but was still probably 6 feet tall. It wasn't as bulky either. It was leaner than the other one, but as soon as I saw those ears sticking straight up off its head, I knew what it was. It was gone in an instant, and so was I. Right back into my house, I slammed the door, locked it, and sat with a gun in my lap. My husband laughed and told me I was nuts, but I know exactly what I saw. I also think in his heart he believed me because he saw how shook up I was. Also, I caught him checking and rechecking the guns and door locks later. I now thankfully live right in the middle of a fairly large city with 0 woods. I feel safer here, but I still keep my eyes open no matter where I am. Thank you for making it possible for people like us to get our stories heard without the ridicule. What you're doing is awesome. Time, 1 a.m. Date, summer of 1991. If you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to talk with me about it, it doesn't matter whether you want to come on the show or not. Most of the people who reach out to me have no interest whatsoever in coming on the show. I just talk to them in private about their experiences. If you would like to talk with me, it's really easy. All you have to do is go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. Once you do that, I'll go through your report and I'll reach out to you so we can talk about that. If you would like to come on the show and talk about your experience, but you want to keep your identity secret, that too is no problem. I can always give you an alternate name during the show, and I can digitally alter your voice. That way even your own mother wouldn't recognize you. If you've seen a Sasquatch and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. And yes, by the way, Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio is alive and well. To find out how to listen to it, go to bigfooteyewitness.com and visit the podcast page. Alright, let's get on to this next encounter. The next encounter took place in El Paso County, Texas, and reads, Hi, I just found your website after looking up Dogman. I wanted to share a story of an encounter a bunch of friends and I had back in 1968. To this day, I still think about it. It's kind of hard to forget no matter how hard I've tried. Anything I say today must be understood as the words of someone who was only 11 years old at the time of the encounter, but I'll try to make myself as clear as possible. On a summer evening in 1968, a group of my friends, an older cousin and I decided to play baseball at a nearby baseball field. The field was about 4 to 5 blocks away from where I lived. The field was southeast from my house. Anyway, we all got together and were playing. There wasn't enough of us to play a team-against-team matchup, so we were rotating one pitcher, one fielder, and the catcher while the rest batted. There were some train tracks that ran parallel to the baseball field. I mention this because of what happened next. My time came up to pitch, and my older cousin was fielding. One buddy hit a foul ball, and it went over the fence toward the railroad tracks. By then, it was getting a little past dusk. The field lights weren't too bad, though. There was a man standing close to where the ball rolled to a stop. My cousin ran towards the fence and yelled at the man to throw the ball back to us. He ignored my cousin, so I ran over and yelled at him as well. The rest of the guys came over and we started to cuss the guy out for ignoring us. None of us wanted to get near the guy, though. Something about him didn't feel right. One of the guys picked up a rock and threw it at him because we thought he was a bum. The rock came close but didn't hit him. Then, a group of guys started to throw rocks at the guy. That's when the crap hit the fan. This guy turned toward us slowly and then dropped down onto all fours. What we all saw next by the dim field lights was not a man, but a snarling wolf-like creature. My cousin was the first to react by yelling, "Werewolf!" Then he turned and ran, followed by the rest of us. We ran as a group. Some were lucky and made it home first, peeling off from the rest of us one by one. My cousin and a friend ran to my house and spent the night. We told my parents what we had seen, and of course they blew us off. My mom told us what you saw was probably the devil himself because he stayed out past dusk. Being Hispanic, we always had holy water around the house. We blessed the house and especially my bedroom. None of us slept that night, and any noise we heard made us jump. The next morning, we, all the guys, screwed up enough courage to go back and investigate. We found our ball where it had landed, but found no visible tracks or anything else. Everyone but me agreed that we had seen a werewolf. I kept asking how it could have been a werewolf if there was no full moon the night before. Time, 7:40 p.m. Date, June 27th, 1968. This next encounter took place in Carroll County, Maryland, and reads, "This happened when I was around 13 years old. I lived in a small country town in the middle of nowhere. There was one street light in the whole town and one small 7-Eleven that my mom worked at. It was later at night, and I told my mom that I was going to walk up and grab some snacks and a Slurpee. She said that was all right. I arrived there a few minutes later and grabbed my things. My mom told me to walk straight home. That was no big deal. So, as I was walking home, I took the same route I always took. I walked down the main street and took a turn that would lead me to my street. On the way there, you did have to pass an alleyway. So, as I was getting close to that point, I got this horribly eerie feeling. I was coming up on the alley to pass it, but I slowed my pace because I could hear something breathing. Deep, low breathing. Now, right before the alley is a fence that I'd say was about 6 feet tall. I stopped at the edge of it before you could actually look down the alley and peered around the edge of the fence. What I saw standing there I will never forget. It was crouched over. Now, even as it was crouched over, it was half the fence's height. It was gray in color and had shining yellow eyes. It had a wolf's body, and its canine-like ears were laid down flat like when a German shepherd pulls its ears back. I could see its muscle definition through its fur. This thing was massive and strong. It had a wolf's face and snout, and it was just crouched there, almost like it was looking for something, grunting and swaying and sniffing the air. Now, I can't tell you at that moment if it knew I was there or not. I was frozen and didn't know if I should turn back or just try to walk past it. After what seemed like forever, I decided to walk past it and continue my journey home. Looking back, that was a very stupid decision. I held my breath and walked along. After I was past the alley, I ran as fast as I could home. Once I was on my porch, I turned to see if it had decided to come after me to try and get me, but nothing was there. At this point, I had started to wonder if I had just freaked myself out, so I walked down my sidewalk a bit to get to another little path that led you to that same alley, and as I got to that point, that thing was running up the alley. It was running on all fours, but its arms were so huge and muscular it seemed almost like it was propelling itself forward with them. It wasn't running towards me, just along that alleyway, but its blazing yellow eyes did lock right onto mine, almost like it knew I was looking for it. I hauled butt into my house, locked all the doors, ran into my room, got under my covers, and didn't move until dawn. I tried to tell my mother, but of course she thought I had just seen a dog. I tried drawing her a picture, but she still stuck to her belief that I had just seen a big dog. I've seen dogs, coyotes, and bears. This was nothing like any of those animals. To this day, I know what I saw. Time, 11:45 p.m. Date, June of 2009. The next encounter took place in Kootenai County, Idaho. I'm writing this from my husband. He told me this story and it haunts him 10 years later. He doesn't like talking about it very much. My husband was at his grandparents' house where they still live on 20 acres. My husband and his 2 friends were 16 years old at the time. Every night his grandpa usually turned off the shop light, but that night my husband and his 2 friends noticed that it had been left on, so they went outside to turn it off. While they were out there, they noticed in the front field there was a tall dark figure that looked like it had a dog face but was very tall. They all ran inside to get their rifles before investigating. When they went back out, they saw about 8 dog-like creatures that were standing on 2 feet in the front field. The boys were frozen and shocked. Eventually, they ran back inside, and when they went to lock the back door, they saw a dogman standing at the back door peering in. This must have meant that Dogman ran very fast to get from the field to the back door. He must have been over 8 feet tall because he was taller than the door and had to stoop in order to look in it. He had huge haunches and was black in color. He had a snout on his face and a man-like form. They stood in fear until eventually the Dogman left. He says it seemed very fast when it ran, faster than a normal human could run. Time, 2 a.m. Date, summer of 2009. This last encounter happened in Erie County, New York, and reads, I had just left a friend's house and was driving to another friend's house for the ball drop for the new year. As I was driving up a road which has Akron Falls Park on the right side of it and the Akron Caves on the left side, I thought I saw a dog on the right side of the road. It was on the side of the road looking like it was ready to cross it. I went to swerve to avoid hitting it, and the dog got on his 2 back legs, looked right at me, and then ran across the road, up the hill, and was gone. I pulled over shaking and was doubting what I had just seen, but I was scared. I was going to turn around because I couldn't believe what I had just seen, but then I thought, are you crazy? You're alone and you have no idea what you just saw. I called my friend to tell him what had just happened and made him stay on the phone with me until I got to his house. I ran in the house and described what I saw. I couldn't sleep for days and never told anyone because I thought they would think I was crazy, but then I spoke to a friend of mine who hunts Sasquatch and told him what happened. When I did, he told me what this thing was called. I googled it and actually found what looked like a picture someone had taken during a real encounter. I started shaking and the whole feeling of the experience came rushing back. I'm not gonna lie, I never believed in this stuff like my friend who hunts Bigfoot. I always used to laugh at him, but this gave me a totally new thought process about everything. My belief grew a little more when we went back to check out the place where it ran through and saw that 2 trees had been snapped in half. I'm a believer now. Time, 11 p.m. Date, November 31st, 2017. Well, that was the last encounter for the night. As always, I want to thank all of you so much for tuning in and supporting the show the way you do. Thanks again so much. Have a great night. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.